up to page 126, and the chapter ends on, I think, page 136. So literally, we've got 10 or 11 pages to go. All right? JavaScript is like most programming languages in that it is event-driven. In other words, it sits around on its butt until you tell it to do something. So in this example that I'd shown you earlier, this one, I think you'd all agree. I'm going to clear this. And I'm going to put in 1, 2, 3 here and 4, 5, 6 here. Would you agree if I never press any of those buttons, nothing else is going to happen in this program? Would you agree with that? I would. Because it's waiting for button clicks. In fact, if I make it even worse than that, if I do this, now nothing at all is going to happen. All right? So that's what the rest of the chapter is going to really start to get into, is what are called event handlers. So when an event happens, you provide the event handler to respond to the event. Does that make sense? All right. So some of the common events that you can respond to are shown on the next page. All right. Window load event. As it says, that means the document has been loaded into the browser. Maybe there's something special you want to do once you know it's been loaded in. Click events we've talked about already. Focus events we've talked about already. All right. Very quickly show you this. I'm going to make this real simple. Not there. But if I've got a real simple, form. Maybe if I throw all the numbers, somebody will put more in there. All right. And I've got here first name and a text box. And I've got here last name, and I got a text box. And I got a button here that says submit. And I got another button here that says clear. Everybody cool with that? Makes sense to everybody, right? Okay. If I put a focus event here, that means that when I start running the program, that's where my mouse is. Does that make sense? All right. If I put Jeff in here, and I click right here, or tab, or however I've got it set up, a bunch of stuff happens in the background. The first thing that happens is a blur event happens. A blur event happens when you leave one control and go to another control. Does that make sense to you? Now think about why that could be important. Let's assume that I had another field in here that said salary. And let's say that I was stupid and then I set it up as a text field, meaning that it would take non-numeric stuff. All right, so I come in here, Jeff, Scott, and let's just say I put 1,000 in here, okay? Well, now if I put hello in there, hopefully it's going to catch it sooner or later when I click the submit button, correct? But I can set it up so that I check the blur event, and I can say that if I put something non-numeric in there, I can tell it, do two things. Cancel what was put in there and put the focus back in there. Does that make sense to you as far as what's going on? So quite a bit you will use this kind of stuff with validation. It's not the only way to use it, all right, but it's a very common use for this, is what I'm telling you. All right, then, so any control can have a change event. Up there when I typed in Jeff, 4 change events in that text box. J-E-F-F. If I put in one too many F's, so I put in J-E-F-F-F, 5, getting rid of that 1 F, 6. That would be 6 change events that would take place. Select, as it says, the user selects text in a text box or a text area. Click, we've already talked about. Double click. Boy, if you could help it, never put code in a double click event. And if you are going to do that, put a message into the user that they have to double click it. I've watched people do that. And that's like a program from hell, because somebody keeps clicking and clicking and clicking and clicking. Then eventually they accidentally double click it. And now it happens. Now they want to go back and do it again. And they don't realize that it's in a double click event. There might be a real valid reason to put it in a double click event. But if nothing else, either put a message by there or a tool tip or something else to let the user know. The mouse events, those are not always, But quite often those are used for one of two things. One is games, because you want to be able to know where you are on the screen. The other one, we've already used the mouse event. I don't know if you remember that or not, but I showed you that little bit of JavaScript code that we put in there that would show the size of the browser window. All right. You can do that with width, but if I wanted to know where I was at any time on the window, all right, I could use mouse events. So mouse over is when you put your mouse over something. All right. Mouse in is like it says, notice this, the mouse moves over the element, the mouse moves into the element. Usually most people put code in, either mouse over or mouse in, but not both. And mouse out, of course, would be the opposite of mouse in. So we've already mentioned this, and we're going to see this in a few chapters, that, for instance, right now when you did the, what was that? Where we made one image go to another one, the rollover thing, you could do a rollover with this too, by using mouse over, mouse out, etc. Let's just double check there, see if there's any good text at the bottom of the screen. So they're showing you some syntax for how to do that. Some of this stuff in here, it's not going to make sense until A, you read the chapter, and B, you start actually using it. All right? So as it says, now notice, there's window.onload equal function. This is the window onload. What that means is once the document has been totally loaded into memory, that message will come up on the screen as an alert. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could. That's the point. So an event handler is a function that's executed when an event occurs. It handles the event. To attach an event handler to an event, you must specify the object and the event that triggers it. So what's the object? A text box. What's the event? When I click it, type of thing. All right? You can generate a function expression as an event handler and attach it to an event. You're going to see some of this in just a bit. All right. You can also create and attach an event handler in one step. And that's what they've done here. All right. Again, it's not going to make a ton of sense until we really start using it. We are going to look at, in just a couple minutes, that other calculator program. And you'll start to walk through what's in there. All right. So how to use an onload event handler and attach other event handlers. So when we look in here, it says the web browser after the email address has been changed. All right. Well, the point is that I think everybody gets, everything that's in there. I think you all could look at that and know what every bit of that is. Let's look at the JavaScript. This is probably the most complex JavaScript we've seen thus far. This is our aliasing function. You already know this. This is the join list function. So when we call join list, we're telling it to have an alert that comes out that says the join list function is being run. I want you to understand, this right here is a function. This function is not run until we call join list. Does that make sense to everybody? It would just sit there if we never called it. Kind of like the plus sign that I just showed you on the calculator. All right. Here's another one. Change value. All right, it's a function for the text box. Now, this is what I want you to get, and this is probably the hardest thing of what we went over so far in class. What this does, I told you before about using this thing on the top here, it's aliasing. This is what I call, and it's my wordage, you're not going to see it in a book, registering. What this says is, hey, when we got this join list, when we click on it, call that routine. When we change something, all right, call that routine. So it's setting it up. We're not calling join list. We're not calling register or change value here. There's no parentheses there. Do you see that? If there were parentheses there, that would say call the function. This is registering it. It's saying when you do this, call this. When you do this, call this. And you're going to see examples of that in just a couple minutes when we go over the other calculator program and when we look at the programs at the end of this chapter. All right. The event handler for the onload event can be used to attach. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. All right, that's what they're getting to, and they're right. So they go back and they redo the miles per gallon program. So let's look at this. Again, I'm asking you this question. Is there anyone in here that doubts that you could write this, that you could create this? I'm not talking about the formatting, etc. I don't care. But I think all of you could put in an H1. You could make it blue even if you wanted to. All right? You could put in a label and a text box, a label and a text box, a label and a text box. You could put disable there, and you could put in a button. I think everybody in here could do that. The difference is when we've done the program before, when we've done the miles per gallon program, we've just used alerts, prompts and alerts. That's been it. Well, that's not real reflective of real life. Now with this one, you can put in the miles driven, you can put in the gallons used, you can press the button, and you get your miles per gallon. All right? So the reason I went over that just for a second is that HTML that's in there, I don't know why they made it blue in the book here, but they did. But that HTML, I don't think we have to go over any of it because I think that you know how to use the HTML already. Then notice what they've done in here. They put all the code in line. So all the code is in here. So there's your use strict. There's that alias that I mentioned before. Here's calculate MPG. So when you call calculate MPG, you have to pass in two values, miles and gallons. Once you pass them in, MPG is what you think it would be. It's the miles that you drove divided by the gallons that you used, and then you set it to one decimal place and you return it. Really, when you think about it, it's pretty much the same code that we did earlier. But now what we're doing is we're assigning a function to a variable. All right, we had not been doing that before. And here's our process entries. What the heck is process entries? This is where we're going to try to make sure that what we input into here is valid. So notice if you put a non-numeric value in for miles or you put a non-numeric value in for gallons, an alert comes back. And it says both entries must be numeric. Now, you know how to do this because we already looked. You could take that value property that we looked at before and you could set it equal to double quote, and you could remove whatever they put in there that wasn't a number if you wanted to do that. All right? Otherwise, if either one of them is negative, you could do an alert. They're still using alerts, but you use an alert with another message. If you get down to here, you put in a positive value for each one. Does that make sense? Now, you could put in a gazillion and it would do it. So we could have made some kind of limits on here like I showed you. But they don't really care about that, and that's fine. All right? This says right here, two things. When the function loads, or when the window loads, so in other words, when the document is loaded into the browser, this says, when I click the calculate button, call the process entries routine. That's this one. Again, this is registering it. It says, when I click this, so the on-click event, call this. It's not telling it to call it. It's telling it that it should be called when you click that. Does that make sense to people? All right. And then this is saying, put the focus on miles, which is my first field. Okay. And the rest of that is just HTML. Now, if you start going through this, and again, they disabled the miles per gallon. If you start going through this and it doesn't make sense to you, I would strongly recommend, because you've got this code was given to you, this code from the book, that you literally just bring out the two, I think it's all in one file. I don't know if there's there's probably a CSS file. Did they even mention, do they have one here? Yeah. So there's two of them. There's a CSS file, which puts the pretty blue stuff around it, etc. But if you don't care about that, just use this one. Comment stuff out. Change stuff to see what happens. All right? Then they go back to this email list application that's right here. You've seen this before. We want to make sure that A, what you put in for email address is an email. B, whatever you put in for re-enter email address is equal to or the exact same thing as what you put into for email address. And 3, that you put in something for a first name. Does all that make sense to everyone? Yes? Okay. So notice here, they don't match, so that's the message we get. The messages must match. Now, I do want to mention something, if you please look on the screen. I changed this around in the calculator program that I gave you. I put the messages over here. All right? And they persist. In other words, in that calculator, if you don't put anything in number 1 or number 2 and you click the button, it says you must enter a number by both of those fields. Alerts are a pain in the butt because you got to shut them all the time. They're modal, which means once they open, you can't do anything else in the program until you close them. All right? That's why I said they're not used very often. They're still using them in here, and I understand the author's rationale for doing it. All right, so he builds this. Again, there is the CSS file. Now he's got an external JavaScript file. All right, so it's not all in here. So this is all CSS. Am I right? I'm asking you this. Am I right in assuming that you all get that? Is that a fair assumption to make? Connor, Gabriel? Yeah? Okay. So let's take a look at the JavaScript. All right. Use strict. We go in and do our aliasing. All right. This join list, when is that going to be called? Well, we have to go down further in the program. There's join list. When do we call join list? We call it whenever we click on the join list button. That's the registering that we're doing right here. So that's saying, I'm not going to go back, but if I did, there's that button there that says join list. Let's do it anyway. And I've got, as soon as I start running Camtasia like this, it really slows everything down. So there's our button, right? That's our only button on here. Join our list, right there. All right. Back, let's do this. Screen. There. I've got a picture of it if we do need to refer back to it. All right. So, again, the button was called join list. When we click that button, call that function. That function, join list, what's that going to do? Pretty much got all of our logic in it. It's just one routine. We're validating everything in there. Could we have broke that out into separate functions? Of course we could have. So if you look in here again, we could have literally written 4 functions. The join our list would have probably been our big, for lack of better words, our driver. Then we could have called validate email address. Then we could have called validate email address confirm. Then we could have called validate first name. All make sense? All right. They didn't do it like that. They're doing all the code in here, which is totally fine. All right, because there's not that much that they're validating. So these first 2 are local variables. These first 3. We're creating them right there. Email address 1, email address 2, and first name. All right. And we've got an error message. So notice what the error messages are going to hold. First email address entry required. Second email address entry required. Email address entries must match. Or first name entry required. So we're going to use that variable error message can hold nothing or any one of those 4 values. Does that make sense? All right. So the first thing we do is we verify that there is something in the first email address. If there is not something in the first email address, what do? All right. We set the error message, all right, which I think in this case is off to the side. So we set that error message and we put the focus back there. All right. Otherwise, we go down and we check the second one. And we do the exact same thing. So if we get down to this point, if we get to this second else if right here, that means our first email address, there was something in there. We don't know if it's valid or not, I guess they're not really validating it. We could have put hello in there. But there's something in there. Does that make sense to everyone? The other thing they really should have done right here, just so you know, where they're checking to see if it's equal to that, what they should have added right here, all right, is they really should have said something like, after they do all this, somewhere in there they should have used the trim function on there, which we don't want it set up so you can just put a blank space in there and it'll take it. And the trim function would fix that. All right? Okay. So we validate that there's something in the first text box, there's something in the second text box. So if we get down to here, there's something in each one. Now here we're validating that they're the same thing. If we get down to here, they have put in something in their first text box, something in their second text box, and those two things match. All right, so if we get down to here, we're just checking that there's something in there for the name. Again, there should be a trim in there that you're making a check for. All right, if error message equals nothing, submit the form. Again, they did not do a check in here to make sure the email address was valid. Did everybody hear that? In a later chapter, we're going to talk about what's called regex, or regular expression handling, where you can write a regular expression to make sure that your email is, not that the email itself is a good email, but that it's validly formatted. We'll look at that in a later chapter. Otherwise, we just put an alert out with the error message. They are still using alerts. All right. Does the program, what's happening in here, make sense? All right. Because that pretty much, I think, is it for the chapter. So what I want to do is, it's 9:36. I'm going to try to do this in 14 minutes. So by 10 to 10, we'll see if I can do it or not. But I want to go over the other program that I sent you. Not this one. This was the simpler one. There's two folders in the folder I sent you. One is called Calculator Simple, and that's the one we already kind of went over. The other one is called Calculator Complex. I'm not saying that it really and truly is all that or isn't that complex, but that's what I called it. All right, so let me open this. Maybe open already, I don't know. But this, no, I don't want the simple one. I want the complex one. And I want to open up the HTML file. So I'll tell you what, I got way too much stuff open here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close a bunch of this stuff. I've got a bunch of stuff open for my afternoon class. That's why it's a little hard to read what's going on here. I want to move that over. All right, I don't want this or this or this. I'll keep that. All right. So let's do a file, open, and I want to open up here from my desktop. This is the one I sent you, the Calculator Complex. There is some CSS. I'm not going to go over that with you. There's not a lot of CSS in there. If you look at it and for some reason something doesn't make sense, let me know. All right? But I first want to come in and I want to open up the HTML file. Okay, there that is. And secondly, I want to open up the JavaScript file. All right? Now, first thing I want to mention to you is when I run this, you've already seen it, but when I run this, that's what it looks like. Okay, does it make sense to everybody? This is probably like an H1. This could be an H2 or an H3. It could even be a paragraph. All right, label, text box, label, text box, label, text box, button, 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 button. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, good. That's a good start. These things right here that have the asterisks, they're put in as spans. They're put in at the end of the line right after the particular text boxes. If I leave something off, they show. If I clear, they go back to this. But they're also giving a message, note, fields with the asterisks are mandatory. I mean, let's face it. If you've got someone who refuses to put something in there, well, then they refuse to put it in, right? There's not too much you can do about that. So this is more reflective of an actual calculator. It sure as heck isn't perfect. It doesn't allow you to go, it doesn't do things like square roots, inverses, etc. It doesn't have any of that stuff. It could actually, we could build that in. You can go out, if you really want to see that, you can go out and find a lot of really, really good calculators written in JavaScript out on the internet. I'm just telling you, they're out there. Some of them are hundreds of lines long, and they make it look like an actual calculator. You know, they put, you know, a little, they shape it like one, they put the buttons on there. That's a lot of work. All right, we could do that, but we'd probably have to spend about 2 weeks going over every line. All right, so on here again, these are those spans. So notice span, class equals spaces. All right, why spaces? I don't know why, but I called it that. And I made them red and bold. That's all, just so the message would be red and bold. That's all. And notice again, it's right after the input statement. So it's right after number 1, it's right after number 2. All right, other than that, am I right in assuming that everything else in here you understand? I don't really want to spend any more time on the HTML unless we have to. All right. I am referencing in here, that's calling my JavaScript file. All right. Pretty soon we're going to be getting into, in a few weeks, we're going to be getting into jQuery, and you'll be actually putting more files down there. You'll be including more files than that one. All right. So let's look at the JavaScript. First, let's go down to the bottom. All right, I don't even worry about any of this. Let's go down to the bottom. All right, this says that if I click the sum button or the difference button or the product button or the quotient button or the modulus button or the, you know, any of these 5 buttons, if I click any of them, then call the process entries routine. Does that make sense? Again, I call that registering them. You may or may not. This says whenever I click the clear button, call clear form. Well, that's the easiest one, because what's that doing? It's saying make sure there's nothing in the first text box, make sure there's nothing in the second text box, make sure there's nothing in the answer box, make sure that those asterisks are back there, so if we had error messages or nothing before, put those asterisks back there, because I'm about to do a new calculation. I want the user to know that those are mandatory fields. And put the focus inside of the first text box. Does all that make sense? Yes? All right. Then let's go back up to the top. Not many variables. And again, I didn't do this. Please do this on yours. And go in on yours and change, once you look at it, once you bring it up, change all your vars to lets. All right. Now, probably doing it like that, I probably screwed something up, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. All right, so these are my 3 variables. A and S for the answer, N1 for number 1, N2 for number 2. This, as I put in the message there, create the alias. You are going to be expected to do this on your test on Friday. Putting that in is going to get you some points. Using it correctly will get you more points. Make sense? All right. So what are we doing here? This process entry says, you've already done this stuff. There should be nothing there that you don't get. So N1 is going to be whatever we put into the first text box. N2 is going to be whatever we put into the second text box. Notice, since we're working with the actual text boxes now, it's dot value. All right? We're not using a prompt anymore, is what I'm telling you. Okay? Valid input's a Boolean variable. It's going to say either my input was valid or it wasn't. It's a nice program to show you there's only 2 things I have to validate, right? N1 and N2, those 2 text boxes. They both have a number in there. That's all I care about. Then the valid input is going to be true. If either one of them have nothing in them, then valid input will be false. Does that make sense? All right. Then I've got a thing here called button press. We'll worry about that in just a bit. So what are we doing here? Well, actually, when you look right here, I'm just going to stop it right there. We're doing the exact same thing in both of them. Again, could I have really written that as its own routine and then passed in N1 the first time and N2 this? Yeah, probably. I tried to make this program intuitive. so you could walk through it and know what was happening as you went through it. All right? So if we put something non-numeric in there, what happens? That thing in red that had the asterisk now changes to numeric input required. And our valid input is set to false. It keeps the value in there. We could remove it too. All right? Otherwise, we know it's true. So what that line that you see in gray in there does, that removes, if we had the asterisk there, the red asterisk, it's now gone. If we had the error message that said numeric input required, it's now gone. That says replace it with nothing. And we're doing the exact same thing for N2. So I'm not going to go over that again. All right? So when I get down to here, this says I only want to calculate the answer and show it if my Boolean flag was set to true. If I had valid input. So I know I had a number in the first one. I know I had a number in the second one. That's it. Then this says that if I click the sum button, call calculate sum. If I click the difference button, call calculate difference. If I click the product, call calculate product. If I click the quotient, call calculate quotient. If I call the modulo, call calculate modulo. Now you could say, well, why didn't you put that in there as if-elses? Sometimes it's better to actually leave them as separate ifs. They're different buttons. Okay? That's why I put them in the way I put them in. And what are these? These look familiar to you? Aren't those the same exact things that we just looked at in the earlier example? Return N1 plus N2, return N1 minus N2, etc. They're the same thing. What is different is, notice what we're doing. The calculate sum is now holding that. So when we return that, when we call that function calculate sum, all right, we are calling that function, and it's doing the same thing that we did earlier. Except now, rather than grabbing those two values from prompt dialogues, it's now grabbing the two values from two different text boxes. All right? And what you're going to find fairly quickly is we're going to have another example that we're going to go through, and we're going to look at different ways. I'm probably going to hold off on it until we get into jQuery. But I'm going to show you 4 or 5 different ways to validate a form. I'm going to show you the worst way, which is not to validate it at all. Then we'll validate it just using HTML. Then we'll validate it using JavaScript. Then we'll validate it using jQuery. And if I can get the darn thing to work, we'll validate it again with jQuery with some of their built-in tools. All right? So look at this, not this second, but when you get some time, look at it. If you can understand this, you really shouldn't have a problem when you take the test. I mean, that's not really a fair thing to say, because everybody, when you take tests, you know, you're kind of like this anyway, and I get it. All right? But hopefully it's going to help you. That's what this is for. That's why I set it up like this. Okay? Any questions on anything we went over today in Chapter 4? All right, then there's one last thing that I want to very quickly. I sent you a while back, all right, I sent you a while back your homeworks for this, all right? And I had promised, although we didn't do them, so notice that it's not until next week all Chapter 2 and 3 homeworks are due, all right? The homeworks and the labs, and I'm going to help you with those, just to make sure everybody knows kind of what we're doing, etc. So we'll do some of that stuff together, but the only day I have is your lab day on Thursday. So I'm going to take some of your lab time on Thursday to go over those with you. And then next week, I'll do the same thing with Chapters 4 and 5, because that material, as you probably guess, is harder. All right? Also, please remember, because we're doing good. We really and truly are. All right? And I flipped those. So that's what we did today. Tomorrow, I'm going to give you a pretest. I got to write it yet, so I'll probably write it tonight. The lab will be Thursday, but again, we will go over some of the homework also as a class. All right, and your hands-on test will be Friday. Next week, I just want to make sure that you get this. The material for next week is designed to help you understand further arrays, strings, etc. So we will look at some of the stuff in there in more depth and breadth of coverage. One of the things I usually do, and I'll probably just end up giving you the work and the code, because it's a few hundred lines of code, is we will go and we will look at a very substantial array application. All right, I don't want to go over it right now, but we'll go over it next week. All right, and I'll see if I've got something, or if I've got time to write something for strings, so we can do that. So next week, we'll be doing 13, 14, and 16. No homework on those. There will be a worksheet. You don't have to turn it in. We'll go over the worksheet about a week or so after it's assigned. But, so next week on Monday, we'll go over chapter 13. How to work with numbers, strings, and dates. It's the same stuff we just had in this chapter, but it's expanded. All right? Then on Tuesday, we'll go over chapter 14. How to work with control structures. Guess what? You already know that. That's ifs. All right? But there's also something called a switch that we'll look at. Exceptions and regular expressions. I already mentioned regular expressions to you, but we'll look at those. And then Wednesday, we'll go over chapter 16, which is on how to work with arrays. And I'm hoping that that helps people. All right? And that'll get us into here. And you will probably find that to be one of the hardest chapters in the book. That's on the DOM. And the DOM is just screwy. It's unbelievably powerful, but it's kind of hard to work with. All right? And that'll actually be a lot nicer when we get into that. 2 weeks from tomorrow, we have no class. The school closes for Veterans Day. All right? Then the week after that, when we get into here, these last 2 weeks, jQuery. And I just do want you, the only reason I'm going over this is I want you to understand, once we get back from the break, yeah, we'll have one more test. But this stuff, 15, 17, and 18, no test, no homework, no nothing. I'm planning on giving us a whole week. We probably won't spend every minute of every period, but I'm gonna rewrite either my portfolio or just a portfolio I'll make up, all right, with you. And you can code along, you can look at it, you can do whatever. I will tape it, but I will not be providing the source for that. But I will make sure if you want to follow along, you'll be able to do that. Then the very last week of class, it's all lab. All lab. All right? On that Monday, I will give you about 10 minutes, 15, something like that, where I'm going to explain what we're going to be going over in spring. And there's some software you may decide you want to download now, because it takes a bit to download. All right? And again, can't say it too many times, just so you know, next semester, I know it's way in advance, but next semester we're into C# and you just don't get how to do something. Guess what? Our able tutor has already taken that class. So I'm sure she'd be able to help you. I'm still here. I don't mean that I'm not available. All right? No questions on anything? All right, then the rest of the period for you today is lab.